Hello and welcome to another episode of the Warrior Arist Podcast, a resource full of practical advice, tips and inspiration to help you on your creative journey. My name is Aideen Glynn, and today I'm delighted to be joined by visual artist, curator and arts facilitator Dermot Browne. Dermot Browne was born in Dublin and studied art in the Limerick School of Art and Design. Dermot is a painter who's particularly drawn to abstraction. He's also a curator and now an arts facilitator who at the time of recording has launched 2 spaces and is in the process of completing the third of 3 new art spaces in the Cork area. As if this wasn't enough, Dermot is also a qualified life coach and a black belt in Aikido. I first met Dermot at the very first group exhibition I was in back in 2019 when he was working as a gallery assistant in the Lavitt Gallery. Now, it wasn't at the opening night, but it was during the run of the exhibition when one day I very shyly wandered in because I wanted to see my painting on the wall. And Dermot came over, he introduced himself and he offered to take my photograph of the painting. And we got to chatting and I suppose we struck up a friendship and have remained in touch over the years. So Dermot, hello and welcome to the Warrior Arist Podcast.
Thank you very much, Aideen.
Oh, thanks for giving up your time to talk to us and share your story. So I suppose first I'd like to talk to you about your own art because you do so many different things. And I think you don't talk that much about your own art practice. So firstly, I want to say, did you always want to be an artist?
Yes. I mean, from a very young age, I was, drawing and messing with stuff. And I have a very early childhood memory of asking my mom for some paints that I would have seen on these children's art programs. They teach you how to do this and that, and I was like, can I have those, Mom? And so this is a very early memory for me. And to be honest, later on in school, there was careers guidance, there was all kinds of stuff going on. There were people nervous about the leaving cert, but they were nervous, I think, because they didn't know what they wanted to be yet, an awful lot of people, whereas I never felt that. I never had that anxiety, but I had a strange feeling of like, how can you not know what you want to do? So this was an unusual thing that I noticed from an early point.
So it was always art. So it was your favorite subject in school, and then you went to art college.
Yeah. I did really badly in the leaving cert. I did really badly in the leaving cert because I just poured all my time into art, and I didn't realize you had to do all these other spread your attention across different subjects.
Oh, I think that's great. I mean, I think everyone should do that. You knew what you wanted and you had this single-minded focus on it. And you've said that you are a painter who's interested in everything as expressed through painting, especially abstraction. And we've talked about that we both love abstraction, but how would you say, what is it about abstraction that you love or that really connects to you?
I could do the whole podcast on that, Aideen, because sometimes abstraction is about nothing. It's also about everything, and it's partly just a tool to play with color freely. Whereas if you're tied to, let's say, a more figurative language, you might be more specific with your colors. So I really enjoy playing with color and form. And sometimes, like, we're coming out into the spring now, but sometimes in the depths of winter when I go into the studio, I go, oh yes, that's why I do this thing, is because the winters are hard in Ireland and dark and gray, and then it gives you an opportunity to go somewhere that's potentially full of life and color. But there was a friend of mine recently asked me almost the same question. He's a theatre director, Owen Hanrahan. He said, like, what's your painting about? Something to that effect. And it's a difficult question because the answer is different nearly every time. But I said to him, I'm involved in manipulating empty space in an abstract. That's what I consider that I'm doing. I'm not turning the empty space into something else. I'm trying to discuss how empty space works. So it crosses over with a lot of my other interests in meditation and martial arts. So you're trying to deal with emptiness and form through a fixed language, So
was it always paint? Because when you say empty space, that could be sculpture. Was it always paint that you were drawn to, and that tactile nature of color?
It was always anything 2D: painting, drawing, printing, collage. I love collage work. And, I consider that I am working. I mean, I'm going to contradict myself now. I said I'm working with empty space, but it's about empty space, really. So sometimes in the paintings I make, you'll see shapes and boxes and forms, almost, sculptural forms built up on top of each other. So I do consider that I'm working with 3 dimensions as well, and then there's the added element of putting in the collage, a flat piece of collage on top of something. So you're playing with that figurative language. You're telling people it's abstract, but look, it's not abstract, so hopefully it's provoking an awareness in the observer, So painting for me, painting has to be in love with the observer.
That's a really lovely way of putting it. It's not just about yourself, it's about the relationship with the person who will be looking at this one day when it's hanging up and what it is. But I'm so struck by what you were saying as well about the long winters in Ireland, and that when you paint, it gives you that color, it gives you that instant summer or spring or new life. So it definitely is. But you've moved. So when I met you first, you were living in Cork City, and then you moved pre-pandemic out to Rathcormac village in North County Cork, where you have a larger space. Before we started recording, you showed me around a little bit there. It looks amazing. And did that make having that extra space, particularly I imagine during lockdown, that must have made a big difference to your work, having a bigger studio?
Huge difference. And the idea that I can now go from the kitchen to the studio in 5 seconds and start painting is just fantastic, and I have to try and balance my life, because if I got locked into the studio with a pot of coffee, I'll never come out again. It's just where I want to be, so it's been a challenge for me over the years to try and organize other things and train in other areas and be active, because it can become an obsessive thing, and that can be good. That's a double-edged sword. It can be good to be very focused on something, but I'm a little bit against the kind of myth of the obsessive artist, the kind of headlong into the studio, and this year I'm obsessed with this color, or this year I'm obsessed with this idea. And it's very romantic, and I get it, but I don't buy into it anymore at all. I think we have to really use our time wisely when we're in the studio. But it's also important, Nadine, to just be in the studio. When I studied life coaching, we had to do like peer coaching. So your fellow students were coaching you. And there was one girl who's very, very good. I had a problem at the time, and I couldn't go into the studio, and things weren't working. And she said to me, just go into the studio and touch the things, just be in there and touch the paint, the tubes, and touch the canvases and be there. And she's not an artist, but this was a very good suggestion, to sort of
for creative block, because once you go in there, then you'll start, I wonder if I squeeze that out, and describe your studio. So before this, was your studio not in your home when you lived in Cork City? Was it
It wasn't. It was in different places. I had a studio in the sculpture factory before moving out, so that was quite cheeky. Right. And anyone from the sculpture factory, my apologies. I pretended I was doing a 3D project. No, I was making some. I was making some structures to store paintings in, but I really used it like a painting studio, and they were teasing me about that, in the sculpture factory, the painter. But to be honest, I felt very at home, because a lot of in the sculpture factory is such a making space. It's such a physical reality. And when I look at my own paintings, sometimes you'd want to make paintings and you want them to end up in a particular way, and they're coming out another way altogether, and you have to accept that. And I don't want to let myself off the hook either, but you have to look at the paintings and the results. And for me, my paintings are very rough sometimes. They're very rugged and rough and almost unfinished looking. But I love that the Japanese might call it, raw, wabi-sabi kind of, roughness to them. And that fitted into the sculpture factory for sure. That was really kind of like, it worked. But yeah, I mean, it's tough, if you're renting a studio and you're watching the clock tick on a rented studio, it's tough. It puts you under pressure. So to be able to be out here in the countryside, and there's huge windows here in the studio, and there's light coming in, and I constantly need to tidy it because I have too many things, and I keep stuff. I keep cardboard from wrappings and stuff like that. So I constantly have to tidy it. So, but tidying for me is not, a sort of a chore. Tidying gives you an insight into the studio because you'd be tidying or arranging or saying, let's put those works away. And what you're doing is your eye is watching other works in the studio that you were afraid to go at. So this is something I would typically, it's if there's any rule in the studio is don't go at the painting that you'd really love to get right. Do something else in the meantime. Start stretching another canvas or start preparing other wood, or tidy the studio, and then your eye is always looking at that piece, and then all of a sudden it's done and you haven't, put yourself under the pressure of getting it right.
That's interesting. So when you're working on something, I haven't heard that before, and it's the painting you're working on or you want to complete, you resist going at it first. You do other things and you just work it out in your head.
I'll do anything other than do that painting, because typically for me there's a color that I'm looking for. It's always about color, and if I'm not in the studio for a few hours or a few days, my ability to mix the color has gone downhill. So if I go back in and I've spent a few days and I'm mixing and I'm just throwing paint onto a bit of collage that I was doing, you're starting to get the juices going again, and then you can have a color in front of you and then you look over and you go, that's the color for that painting. So it comes out very organically, so that's something that's second nature to me now at this point in time. Is, an example, Aideen, would be, let's say I'm trying to finish a painting for something like the RHA annual exhibition. I don't know how many paintings I've messed up completely because I was trying to finish them and get them right, and it just takes the joy out of it.
Okay, the kind of that pressure, that deadline, particularly if you're trying to have this sort of rough unfinished work. I mean, you must really have to resist the temptation to overwork, because it's so easy to go so far and then suddenly you've lost it, and it's very hard to get that back. But can you describe your studio first? So is it a bedroom, or is it a space in a space where is it? It
was a bedroom. It was an extra bedroom in this house, but it has two full walls of windows. The house here is designed, almost top to bottom glass walls. So, if I asked someone to design a studio for me, it couldn't be better. And there was a few tables that weren't being used, so I set a table up in the middle, and I'll have my painting equipment on that, and I have a table then with the paints, and I have a small easel that I set pieces up on. But then I'll often work on the floor as well, because the bigger paintings, there's a couple here behind me, you try and work in the round, and you try and work and move around them physically, so then it becomes more of a physical endeavor, So how can I describe the studio? I'm getting better. There's all sections organized with, here's all my collage stuff. There's a section where I throw stuff. So there's lots of things like nails that were rusted and bags that were made of hessian that I just can't throw out. And in my head, I'm always going to turn into some kind of found object mixed with painting, and it still hasn't happened. But I collect these bits and pieces of rough, dirty things, but they're great objects to have in the studio, just to inform the texture.
Yeah, that sounds inspiring. That sounds amazing. I've seen it on Instagram, but I'm just wondering how big it is. And so you talk about, it's so easy now for you to go to the studio because it's like in your home, you can just wander in there. What is your studio practice? Do you paint every day or several times a week? Or how do you manage all that time?
I'd say, Aideen, I'm talking about my studio, how easy it is to go to. I haven't been in the studio for a month, I'd say now. And that's just a particular moment in time. It's after Christmas. There's been exhibitions on. There's been other projects that I've been pursuing. Because for me, in my hard-won wisdom, it's about a balance of things, So it's very easy for me to go into the studio, make 15 new paintings, but I don't have anywhere necessarily to show them. I don't have the platform set up to sell them. I don't have the audience ready. So I'm trying always to build those things in parallel with the studio. I see an awful lot of artists frustrated that they've done this great work, or they've done work that they're proud of, and then they don't have an outlet for it. So this is part of my work that I do in parallel with my own studio practice. But no, when I'm in the studio, when things are going well in the studio, I'll be like, breakfast into me, downstairs, I won't start with important stuff straight away. I might tidy or cut wood or do a small bit of collage work or something physical that you can just use your hands. And then I'll go and have another second coffee, and then I'll go back down, and then you're ready to go. So you might have a late lunch that day, and you just go at it, and that might go on for a week or two. But more than that, it's an issue for me that I will let go of my other responsibilities if I just let myself stay in the studio. I will.
That's great, though. It is that balance of time, though, managing and all the jobs we have to do as an artist. And when you're in the studio, do you have music on, or is it quiet?
I have music on all day. This is a difficult thing to be on this podcast now and not be listening to music at the same time.
Yeah.
I have music on all day, Aideen, and especially in the studio, and that varies depending on what kind of work I'm doing. There's a huge range of music that I would listen to, but I'm into indie music. I'm in 90s. I came of age in the 90s, and a lot of great, cool bands then. We were spoiled, But in art college in Dublin, in Dunleary, I was there for a year. I had some great friends there, and we used to joke, like, if the professors asked us, so who are you influenced by? We'd say, well, the Jesus and Mary Chain and Sonic Youth and My Bloody Valentine. And it's very true to say that I think I would be more influenced by music than other art. Obviously, I have a great interest in visual art, but it's the music that's informing. It's this the kind of music like a great Irish band like My Bloody Valentine, right? There's albums by them that just don't get old, and they make work in a way that feels like they're building the work up and they're tearing the work down at the same time. They're kind of they're prepared to go to the edge where it's nearly broken, the whole thing, So that's
sort of like how you're describing your work, actually, all those layers. And like when I look at your work, there's you have a very beautiful palette, very muted palette, and you sort of use similar colors. There's a mutedness, like I can see it's coming from nature, and then there's all these repeated elements, these which could be like music, where you build up layers, and then there's all this rawness, there's kind of the drips, and there's a looseness. I think certainly in the last few years it's gotten looser, and it's like a real balance between that. It used to be more structured, and there's still these structured repeated patterns, but then there's these loose elements as well, but all these really, really beautiful colors. So I can see how like music would feed that. And for me, definitely music as well. Also, it helps me paint, because I suppose I have to. Yeah, I have to listen to music, and I couldn't listen to a podcast. I couldn't listen to words. It has to be music, and I find it's a shortcut in. I suppose there's a connection between it. Like, I think music, painting, and poetry are all connected. They're all sort of similar ways of expression, and it's probably bypassing some part of you that helps you become creative. And so you talked about, so you're a studio, and do you have any favorite tools or paints? What do you like to work with?
I mean, what I do is as I'm building up the layers of the painting, I mean, it's this idea that you could go. There's a lot of artists spend an awful lot of money on their materials, and I'm not saying that's wrong. You need to do what you got to do, but I treat myself to Old Holland paints, and I use them as the process is going. Oil
You're
paints.
Using oil paint? Yeah.
Oil paints.
Oil Hollands are beautiful.
Yeah, but I'll mix them in with other paints, so I'm not a purist like that. I'll mix them in with, I think there's a Georgian, is it to make? I can't remember, but I love mixing colors. I love getting them right, and I'll typically have 2 jars, of the white spirits or the turpentine, and I have 2 there, one to clean the brush, and one, like, when that jar gets too dirty, I'll pour all of that in there. But then I'm using the gunk at the bottom of that jar is essentially the accumulated color that's fallen to the bottom. So it's gray. So anytime I've got a color that's just too happy and too punchy, I'll mix in a little bit of that, and it just tones it down. So it's a very particular personal process where it's almost alchemical, where you're using what's there to create something that looks aged, or it looks lived in. It's like a good pair of shoes that you had, that you love them. I want the paintings to look like that at the end.
That's a great idea. And it's a great way of unifying all your colors, because if all your colors have a tiny bit of this muddiness, it gives you that because you do have a very specific palette. So I can see how that would help with that. And it's muted, like you don't have any, you can see that they're not straight from the tube. They're all mixed a little bit and they have that beautiful.
Well, this is what
They're
my wonderful
speaking to
art
each
teacher.
other.
I had an art teacher in school, Aideen, Donald Higgins, and this is a kind of, I've had a number of teachers along the road who just couldn't. They were put there on purpose. It's just like a synchronicity going on. It's someone who sort of saved your life at a particular moment in time. And Donald was the first one and the best one. And he condensed for our Leaving Cert 3 volumes of Renaissance art history and wrote out his own notes. And he showed us how to mix color. In 1 or 2 years, there were 3 or 4 artists came out of his class that are still practicing today. So it was an incredible experience. But sorry, what were you asking me before that?
I can't remember. What school was this in, actually? Was this Malahide you're from, is it? Or
Portmarnock Community School.
Portmarnock. Wow.
Donald has retired. Donald retired now, I'd say 2 years ago. But let's say we were 16 and he brought into the school an exhibition of Chris Doris artwork. So Chris is a Mayo, Dublin artist who, we were bowled over by this as 16, 17-year-olds. There were canvases ripped and torn, and there were crucifixes, and there were color, and there was a whales. I remember a print. Chris did a lot of monoprints. So I got back in contact with Chris years later, and I curate his work now, and I'm contact with him regularly. And it was all because of Donald. I actually wrote my Leaving Cert essay on Chris Doris. I'd say I'm the only person to ever have done that. That's
amazing. So you came across him as a student in second level, and you've since gone on, connected and curated his work. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And when he sounds like an amazing teacher, did he teach you how to work with oil paint or the acrylics?
Everything. Oil paints seemed too exotic to us because they were just messy and there was, toxic materials and whatnot. So
yeah.
I do remember, he did poster design with us. We had Letraset. I don't know if you know what they are, Aideen, Letraset books. So typography books.
Letters.
With every single type of typographical font was in these books. And there were stacks of them over in the corner. And I just was pouring through these things and trying to draw so I was quite good at graphics and design kind of things. And it's kind of coming back now a little bit in other ways, but Donald taught us a bit of everything. Monoprinting, he got us to do monoprinting probably when Chris was there in the college, in the school. Chris was into this monoprinting, but a very simple form of monoprinting where you would use kind of newsprint and just draw onto a plate and then, roll over that, and you get a very simple kind of monochromatic drawing. But I did a drawing, if I show you now, if I go halfway across here, and my head is kind of halfway in the screen. So I did this monoprint, and Donald said to me, "It's very Freudian, Dermot, this split, And I went, yeah. I had no idea who Freud
cool.
was. You know what I mean? He's like, it's very Freudian of you, Dermot, And he's that kind of person who is lifting you up all the time, And I remember one point in time he was arguing with me about something after class, and I was like, "But last week you agreed with this, and now you're arguing with me about this." And he said, "Yeah, I'm trying to make you opinionated. I'm trying to get you to hang on to
your opinion.
It's trying to get me to develop my opinion about something." And I had this moment then of going, "Oh my God, do you know what I mean? This is an education that you couldn't get in the rest of the school."
Absolutely. That's incredible. And when you're working on your paintings, I'm curious to know, do you work on multiple pieces? You talked about your process on tables and floors, or is it one at a time?
Too much, Aideen, too much. And there's a parallel there with my projects and my curatorial stuff and my entrepreneurial stuff. I'm working on too many things at the same time outside the studio, and I'm working on too many things at the same time in the studio. And I've accepted that at this point in time. I've accepted it's a way of working. But we do need to kind of dovetail out and sort of, finish things or let things be finished. And, that's partly why it's important to have solo exhibitions. I have a solo coming up next month. So that gives you an opportunity to sort of focus down and say, look, let's call all these finished and see what they're like on the wall. And it's a great moment to
and
do that.
Gives you a deadline as well, like otherwise you can just keep creating. So
exactly.
That brings us onto your curating role, Dermot. I mean, you've curated, like, even back from approaching somebody who you met as a student, connecting with somebody, and you call yourself a curator with a small c. But what really strikes me is I think you are an amazing connector of people, and it's possibly a skill you're not even aware that you have. And like you told me before we started speaking that you're shy, which I totally would not have imagined at all, because I don't know, I think you're very good with people and you're very empathetic, and you're also very generous at talking to people and very good at supporting new artists and emerging artists and introducing artists to each other, which I think is a great skill. You just don't focus on, yourself or your own thing. You're very good at mindful of other people there, even down to that time when you spoke to me when I was, hadn't a clue. And I remember then I had a small exhibition at a community space, and you brought other artists to meet me, and you were always connecting and introducing people. And it's just a great skill you have. And I can see how that would really help you as a curator in all that bringing work together. And what do you like about being a curator, and what you don't you like about it? And
can I go back for 1 second to the school, and I'll get to that hopefully tangentially. Sure. There was a not every school had a guidance counselor, and we had a guidance counselor, Mr. Taff, and he was a very interesting character, and he had his own little room, which looking back on it was probably the size of a broom closet, and you went in there and there was stacks of books up, careers and books and whatnot. And I was fascinated by that space and by people and why their choices, why are they making these choices? Who wants to go and be a nurse, and who wants to be an engineer? And I, on the surface of it, I should have been in there looking at my own career, but there was a fascination with all these possibilities, So for me, it is about people and the choices people make. And I do love meeting new people. I think we have to know what some of our skills are, even if it's difficult to be so personal and aware of ourselves. Like I did it during the lockdown. I did a couple of very interesting courses. One of them was through the States, and trust the Americans to call it something like the inner MBA. So it was about inner practices and mindfulness and conscious leadership. But on one particular form that they asked you to fill up, they said, again, a very American way of putting it, what's your superpower? So they said, what's your superpower?
And what was yours?
Cursing at home. I was here at home cursing, going, fuck you, superpower. What are you talking about? I hate you, And then I thought about it for a minute, and I said, no, there is something that comes very easy to me, and that's connecting people. I love connecting people, and I love doing that. And I have, like, a friend of mine joined LinkedIn recently, and he said, Dermot, how can you have 1,500 people on LinkedIn? And I said, well, I just do, and they're from all different kinds of backgrounds and all different kinds of industries. And you might connect with somebody, and then 2 years later, you might go, oh, that person doesn't know that person. And it's not like I'm trying to leverage my own situation. It's just really enjoyable to get people to meet each other, So it's doubly interesting.
In people. Yeah, you're very interested. Yeah. I remember the opening of the exhibition. So Dermot curated a group show that I was delighted to be in, New Yen Art in the Crane Visual. And I remember I talked to you afterwards, and you said that you were very mindful the whole time of who's there and introduce people to, like as if it was a dinner party almost. And I think that's an unusual skill. And I think very few people have that ability to kind of be watching the room and sort of saying, oh, that person should talk to that person. Do they know each other? And it's a real skill, actually, I think. And it's certainly, you definitely have it. So, and I remember something else that struck me is, we've met a few times in person or maybe by text. And anytime I mentioned anybody, you knew them. You were like, oh yeah, I know him. I met him 10 years ago. Or every single person I came across in the art world, you already knew them and had a relationship with them, which I think is really unusual.
But it's a strange sensation from the inside out, Aideen, because it's not a big deal in one sense, because like if you're in the art world long enough, any world long enough, you end up knowing people through one role or another role. And, Cork is not that big a place. But, I look at other people who are in the art world and I go, oh my God, I couldn't do what they're doing. I couldn't do this. all week long. This sounds negative, but I couldn't deal with artists all week long because artists require attention, and I'm one of them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Artists require love and attention, and I love meeting people from a variety of interests and backgrounds. You know, but I see some people who are plugged in to the art scene, and I think that there's something, you know, wrong with that, because if you've nothing else that flows into your space from the outside, from other areas, other businesses, other, you know, life paths, you know, then you're just a networking monster then at that point in time, you know.
Well, you're interested in people. I can see that even from your early years, and with the career in that career office, you like people and how they work. And I can imagine that must be an amazing skill as a curator. When you're thinking of an exhibition, you're like, oh, you know, you're thinking about their art, but probably also as the people in terms of how you pull an exhibition together.
It's strange, like the New Year in Art exhibition. I'm so happy with how that's, you know, it's at the moment it's still on the wall. I'm very happy with the reaction to that. I'm happy with the way it worked. But like you mentioned Aikido earlier on, like there's a feeling in the martial art Aikido that I didn't do it, it just happened. You know, so you're not trying to throw somebody over; they fell over, and you were just happened to be there. You know,
so like that's an effortlessness. So like you just or facilitating it. Yeah, it's like a grace.
And that there's a grace to it, and that's how that exhibition felt to me. Was, you know, you're listening to the moment that's in front of you, which is the same as painting a picture. You're trying to pay attention to what's happening in front of you. And when I was up in Dublin for that curating event, the speed curating with the VAI, it's just one lady after another with, you know, interesting paintings, funny paintings. But like there was only one or two guys, not that they weren't interesting, they were, but I said, look, listen to what's happening in front of you. And there was loads of other female painters in Cork and abroad and artists in general. I said, just do this, see what happens. So, you know, it's an opportunity to have you in the exhibition, which I had never done properly, let's say, before. An opportunity to bring in an artist from Barcelona. So it is a question of it's like the contacts, just leaving them there for as long as you can. And then at one moment in time, bring it all together. You know, so it's scary because you don't know. And that's partly what I'm trying to do with the Crane Visual Space, is not plan 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in advance, trying to leave it a little bit more open to see how it can react to the events that are happening around it. You know, it's part of a practical reality that other museums and galleries plan far ahead. But for me, it's not. It's the death of creativity to plan 3 years in advance.
Well, maybe because it's a small space, so that leads it into there's 3 spaces that Dermot's in the middle of like developing or having developed. One is Crane Visual, which is in Firkin Crane in Cork City. And there's the Richmond Revival in Fermoy. And then there's the one space in Rathcormac, which I think you're working on now. So I think that's amazing. Like you talk about all this energy and all these, that you're doing too many things, but there's something it seems like there's something happening now that you're seeing this need to create the space. And you talked about that you went to, as a curator, to the speed curating event in Visual Artists Ireland in Dublin, and you met all these women artists who were working in abstraction, and that gave you the idea, and then you had the opportunity. So tell us about Crane Visual, that you say you have this, let's talk about that one first, that you have this idea about not being a typical gallery where you're planning years in advance, that you want to be smaller and more nimble and respond to things and be more creative in your programming?
Well, each of those 3 spaces that, you know, just thinking about this in the moment, like each of those 3 spaces represent a relationship, you know, and that seems like an obvious thing to say, but, you know, it's with the Dance Cork Firkin Crane, it's a dance space. And, you know, for me, that seemed like an interesting thing to sort of suggest to them, is how could dance and art cross-pollinate and work together in one space. And they're 2 different communities, but there'd be similar interests. So, you know, that was a conversation that started during lockdown. And, you know, probably there was 2 years of a conversation behind that. And it's worth having the conversation, even if it takes that long, so that something might come out of it. And, you know, it was exciting to think of a round space. So it's a round room. It was exciting to think. And your first reaction is like, for God's sake, don't do that. You know, it's a nightmare, a round space for paintings and art. But, you know, then you think, no, it's something different. let's try it. And I was never intending to open other spaces at the same time, but other things came up, like because friends of ours or friends of friends bought this huge house in Fermoy. So it's the Richmond, it's called Richmond. I think it was owned by the Walker family, then it was run by an order of nuns. And they bought that house and moved their family into it. It has large grounds around it. So it's, I think, an Edwardian period house, and there's huge front rooms, and ceilings. So I took over one of the rooms downstairs and I painted it and I put on a solo exhibition.
And you
And
just
that's a
ask
work in
them,
progress.
Dermot, do you say, oh, look, you've got this empty space, can I use it as an exhibiting space? Is that how that came about?
Oh yeah, but like, I was chancing my arm in one sense, but they knew that they wanted to in the future develop that space and potentially have weddings on, have functions on there. So it was an easy enough thing to suggest, look, if you start having art exhibitions on there now, people will get used to the idea that there's there's different things happening in that space, So it's a compromise, and they're not an art gallery, and it's not open all day to the public. It's by appointment only. So it's a very developing kind of relationship. But then the third space is beside the house over here, and it's a huge structure. Again, it's a kind of a Dutch, as they call it, the Dutch building in the American sense, but it's not Dutch, it's Deutsch. It's the German style of building, and a big A-frame structure that our landlord had developed but hadn't made it into a house. And he's an artist as well. Lionel Powell is an artist, a sculptor. Lionel would have put the sculptures back on top of the courthouse back 25 years ago, so repaired them and put them back. And he restored all of the canvas casts inside in the Crawford Art Gallery. So,
Wow.
he's very sympathetic to the arts, and he's a builder as well. So we just looked at that space and said, there's lots of examples of successful rural kind of community cultural spaces, and why don't we crack on and develop that space? But I studied sustainability during the lockdown, so it's an exercise again in sustainability. There's reclaimed windows. We put in a sprung floor so that we can use it as a dance studio or a yoga studio as well. So there's old tires are there, so it gives a little bit of spring to it. And I don't think it would work necessarily just as an art gallery, so we're developing it into an art and wellness space. So let's see what happens, but all of a sudden I have 3 spaces, and honestly, I'm looking at 2 others, so it could be 5 by this time next year. So
that's amazing. So you're seeing all these opportunities that are out there. Maybe because you saw one, then you could see these other ones, and you're just asking people, basically. So yeah. I mean, that's very brave, Dermot. I know it's with all your connections that all these people, and they obviously like you, and they're saying yes. And the build beside you. So is Lionel, is he building it himself, or you having people in to help?
Building it together.
Like a grant?
Putting our time and effort and money and love into this project, and it's a huge space, so it's probably 30 by 30 feet with high vaulted ceilings and sprung floor, and you could hold a banquet there, you could hold a wedding there. It's huge, but it's here, and it has to, part of my philosophy or interest is in design thinking. So it's a new fashionable area of kind of planning, and you're trying to plan things that fit a particular space. Do you know what I mean? So I might be able to put on some of my selfish high-end abstract painting shows, but I'm not sure in rural North Cork that there's an audience for that, But at the same time, there are galleries in Dublin which exist only to photograph art, So there's some galleries that exist, and their purpose is to photograph art to send to international exhibitions then. So there's lots of reasons for having it. There's a strange relationship there as far as I can see, Aideen, and you'd be able to speak about this in terms of the parallel existence of the real spaces and the online spaces, So
yeah, absolutely. I think
you need both.
There's nothing like seeing work on a wall. I think it is the best thing. I think, and seeing your work hanging with other artists, like, it is such a great feeling. And I think nothing beats that experience. Also, if you're an artist, you love to go and seeing their work in person. It is better than seeing it on a book or on a screen by far. But when people can't get to things, or they can't get out to see things, or even within like I living in Cork and getting to something I miss things that are all in Cork because of life. So if there is another record, it just gives people an opportunity to see things. And I know we made the point of doing a quick live on Instagram, because that meant then there was something recorded we could share of the exhibition in Crane Visual. And I wanted to show the outside because the building is so unique and so interesting.
Amazing.
And always mindful that not everybody looking at this is from Cork, so they don't know what it looks like. And I think that was I thought was clever with Crane Visual, as well as because the big pain about these spaces and these exhibitions is having to invigilate. So invigilate is when somebody's got to sit there all day and be in that space so nobody robs the paintings. And that was so clever when you approach the dance company, because there is a receptionist there. So it's basically open to the public, you can wander in, but you didn't have to provide invigilation. And I know for myself, sometimes I don't go for things because part of it will be you have to invigilate and I just can't give that time.
Yeah.
And so in the space in the Richmond Revival, it's open on appointment. So is it when the family or something, the family can kind of bring people in?
Yeah,
so you don't have to invigilate?
Well, look, I don't want to present an idea that it's all organized. The Richmond Revival is a fun and funky space where they had on a really top quality trad weekend of music. And so the same room that my art was in, there was a full crowd of people. And so I knew that there's going to be moments where people see the work when there's a function on there. And there's been other meetups there. So, it's time that we mixed up the reasons why people see art, and obviously the Firkin Crane is a great example of that, because there's people in there dropping their kids in to see, to go to do their dance classes, or they're hanging around and the class isn't finished yet. And now they have a space to go into, at least during the summertime. We'll see how it works now this summer, but during the summertime, there's busloads of people coming up there. And
absolutely, it's a tourist area of Cork City. It's beside Shandon Bells, for anyone who doesn't know where it is. So it's very famous, beautiful, preserved part of Cork within walking distance of the city. And the Firkin Crane was the old butter market, is it? Or
it was the butter market and the butter building. Exchange. The circular, as far as I know, the Firkin Crane was the butter market where you bought and sold. But where you quantified the value of your butter was the exchange, which is across the way, which is now being redeveloped, which is another story altogether.
Yeah.
But
my grandmother actually used to make butter with her family, and they used to get the donkey and cart from North Cork down to it. And I think her mother was always very proud that they got one of the highest prices for the butter, that it was. And then she talked about the donkey making the butter, and it is a very old part of Cork's history, that kind of butter making.
But since I've been there, at least involved with the gallery, the amount of people who've told me anecdotes about their involvement with the Firkin Crane, like Barbara Keneally, who's in the show, her grandparents, I think, was it her parents or grandparents? Must be her grandparents, would bring in, I think her grandfather had a shop on Washington Street, which was a farrier's. So the people were bringing their horses up with the butter for the butter market. They'd leave the horses there. He'd reshoe them while they were up in the market and bring them back down. And you hear these stories and the city comes alive again,
And it's only a few generations ago. Like it is So a farrier is somebody who does the horseshoes. Is that it?
Yeah, the horseshoes,
So my ignorance.
Well, that's what they did, and I think that they'd stabled the horses for the day as well, so they'd leave them down there and they'd bring the butter up, something like that. I'm probably telling the story wrong, and Barbara can tell you better. But there was other anecdotes then from other artists that I met that had family who brought butter up to the Firkin Crane, And Firkin,
I remember both my daughters did ballet, and I remember going having many times dropping and collecting ballet classes and going to. There's a space above it, which is a bigger auditorium, going to watch shows there. I had never been into the Musgrave Theatre. It's the space in the ground floor that you're using. I think it's so clever the way you're using the spaces in the round, which is very theatrical. And for anyone who's interested, we've actually put a video, and I put a link to it up on Instagram, where you can actually see the space, that you've created these straight walls so that you can hang paintings on them, because I suppose most of the work is 2D, so you're trying to hang it on the wall, but it could lend itself to performance art or sculptural work because it's such an interesting space. And So, and you've got an exhibition coming up. Will you tell us? So at the time of recording, it's not yet, but I think by the time this is published, it may actually be open or about to open. Can you tell us a little bit about your exhibition? Your own solo exhibition.
It's coming up in the Crane Visual Space from the 2nd, that's the Thursday, I think, the 2nd of March until I think it's 6 weeks long altogether. And it brings together some new work and some work that might have existed in the last couple of years. It's all relatively new. Like, for me, it's hard, Aideen, to define what's new, because I tinker away with paintings, and it's frustrating. A solo show is frustrating because you always think, oh, I'll do this new thing that I've been waiting to do. I'll do that for the show, but it's always a mistake to try and push in new work. Whereas there's this work that might be 6 months old or a year old, where it's old to you, but it's not old to the public at all, or to the audience, So I'm bringing together some works that are already in Fermoy, some works that are in the studio, and some newer works that haven't been shown at all. And it's an excuse for me to see the work together in one place. And a lot of abstract work. There's some collage work. It's going to be called The Beauty of Everyday Things. And
it's a great title.
It's the name of a book by a Japanese author, Suetsu Yanagi. And he was a historian of crafts in Japan. And it's a beautiful book, which just the way he speaks about the craft, you could easily be speaking about painting in those terms, So, and again, it's a sort of a pun on my own thoughts about painting, because everyday things, like for artists, the paintings are everyday things. Obviously sometimes I have moments where I go, I love that painting. I can't believe I made that painting. But mostly they're just everyday things, like cups and plates and spoons and chairs. And when they go back
the
in,
nails and the bits of cardboard and all these things you're seeing that are feeding into your work.
Yeah. So, if someone buys it, then I'm fascinated by the way people buy art and hang art in their own homes. So if you go into someone's home, they might have an Aideen Glynn painting, but they might have their own family photos next to it. They might have something on the fridge. They might have a thing that they bought on holidays. And the way people collect and arrange things at home is specific to them. And it's a form of curation, even if they don't know what a curation means. But they become everyday things, is my point. They become domestic items, so they go from my domestic items to the gallery to your domestic items, and that's the idea of everyday things.
I love that. And is it hard, like you're a curator, is it hard to put the curator hat on when it's your own work and you're so close to it, to curate your own exhibition?
It's horrible, and It's for me, I joke about it, but like sometimes I love a painting and hate a painting across one day. In the morning when the light is too hard, I don't like that painting. And then as the evening light comes in and it brings out the subtle colors, you go, gosh, did I paint that? And it's very hard to look at your own work, in my opinion. I don't know if everybody suffers from that, but I definitely suffer from that idea that
I think it's very difficult to be as objective. Like, I know when you were talking about how you curated the New Yin and how you had in mind, okay, I'll put these two people together because they've got that contrast, and that's interesting because you were objective and it wasn't your own work. But exactly. I can imagine when it's your work and you're then curating and hanging and deciding which pieces and how to put it together, that it's very challenging to kind of put back that objective to make it. Well, like, would you be tempted to get somebody else to kind of come in and look at it, or do you want to curate it yourself?
You see that a lot. You see a one person's show curated by another person altogether, and it seems like a lot of effort. I mean, sometimes a curator will come in and write a piece as well about the artist's work, so I get it. I get why someone would do that, but I don't think I need to do that. The paintings are what they are, as long as you don't overcrowd. I mean, our show now at the moment, the New Yin Art, that's quite a busy hang, but I can get away with that because it's a group show. But for a solo show, you don't want to overhang the walls, and sort of say, here's all the things I made. You need to kind of leave spaces for people to pass through. So there'll be some series of works. So there's a series of 15 small pieces, there'll be groupings of work, there'll be big paintings. But whether it's the group show, Aideen, or my solo show, I try and arrange the big paintings first, see where they want to go. move them around for half an hour and see, oh, look, that fits there, that works there. As you walk in, you're going to see this, So I try and switch off my own brain by the time the work gets in, and, just curate it like it's somebody else's work.
Oh, I mean, that's a great tip actually for anybody hanging their own exhibition. Start with the big pieces, get that story, that flow, and then move in the
Well,
other
you
pieces
see,
around it.
I have a friend in Berlin, and I didn't know this existed until I saw him doing it. Endo Donoghue. I was in college with him in Limerick, and he had a show somewhere, and it was probably abroad. So, I know it was for the Limerick City Art Gallery. He had a big show there a few years back, and he had designed out a miniature version of the gallery, like an architect's design, physical design, and he had printed small versions of the paintings, and he was placing them in around the walls. I thought that's an insane amount of preparation. And then I realized lots of artists do that, especially for bigger museum shows. They would go ahead and do this. But
like
if
mock
I
up
know,
a little 3D model and cut them out and move them
you
around.
see the 3D models and the little rooms made out, and
yeah, that's a lot of work. You can get apps for that actually. But I know I had to do that. Like I've very little experience of curating my own work, but I decided to do the art source and the RDS, and I was so stressed about, because I was going by car, what am I bringing with me in the car that I'll have with me, and what am I hanging on the wall? And because I had so many favorites to kind of go, what ones am I going to choose? And I just tiny bit of wall. So I actually just used an app, I think, in the end, to do that moving around, because I'm visual and I had to see it to plan it in advance, because I didn't have the luxury of doing it in the space. I had to decide and know exactly what I was bringing. But I was looking online, people were doing that small moving around. And I suppose if you're visual, you have to have some kind of way of working it out.
Yeah, but if I know a space, and I can walk through it in my head, knowing where things are going to go, and I really enjoy it. To me, that's a design. You can call it curating, but for me, it's design. And I'm a big fan of Bruce Mao and his view of design being everything. He's a Canadian designer who was invited over by the Design Crafts Council for the design week that was on maybe before Christmas. And I would have heard him speak online before, but I went up and met him and his wife BC, and he has a great phrase. See if I can get it right. Where we fail to design, we design for failure. So in his view, everything is design. It's not just a question of here's a glass, or here's a book, or you're designing systems. You're designing the way people pass through a room with an exhibition. So curatorial practice, like I can't say that I'm involved properly as a curator. Curators live in museums and they have jobs and titles, and I'm an artist who wants to see certain exhibitions happen. And Michael Cullen, who's dead now, he died last year, was a lovely artist, a nice friend. And the only painting that existed in the Firkin Crane before I got there was a painting that was donated to them by Michael Cullen. And I would have curated him into exhibitions when he was still alive. And Michael said to me once in the studio, I was probably having this same conversation I'm having with you about, I'm not a curator. And he was one of the people who would have started the independent artist movement in Dublin in the 60s or 70s. And he said, we didn't call ourselves curators. We were just artists who are putting on exhibitions, So, I get it. You're just getting the work out there. And I get it. Some people are clearly curators, but there's an awful lot of people, I think they enjoy the title a bit too much.
I think it's another form of creativity, really. You're looking for opportunities, new spaces, ways of showing your own work and other people's work. And I'm delighted, by the way, that you are actually having a solo exhibition, that you're not just doing group shows all the time, that you are also showing your work, because it's, you put so much work into the space. It's only right that you get to have that showcase. But yeah, I think, how do you manage then all these different jobs you're doing? So you're trying to paint, you're trying to create, you're creating opportunities. Do you have do you work out like a timetable? Do you plan your week, or is it what's the most important job? How do you work out your time and balance it?
Well, the 2017, I did this life coaching course I was telling you about, and the first module of that, was time management and how do you manage your time, and it was very useful because I don't know how many they listed out how many minutes are in the day and how many hours are in the week. When you hear it, it's insane. And they ask you, what are you doing? Write down what you're doing. And you can't, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. You're not conscious of what you're doing all day. So it's difficult because, like, to be organized, and there's a huge field of people out there, coaches and creative coaches, who are helping people to manage their time and manage their resources. But I suppose for artists, it's going to be very personal. How do you navigate, especially if you have a family, how do you navigate all of the needs and the troubles? And, again, back to Chris. So when I met Chris again after all those years, it was a very similar path. It was very strange. So he had been, involved in meditation and mindfulness, and he was retraining. He's now, a long time now, he's a psychotherapist. So there was a dual interest in how people manage their lives and art, So I think what my point about that is, I've often spoken to Chris about this struggle when you're being pulled away to do something else that's not your art. We kind of agree that it enriches the art when you come back. When you come back in, it really, there's something then, you're back in the studio, this is valuable time. Whereas if I had the whole week to myself in the studio, maybe I just wouldn't appreciate it as much, So that's not
a very
really
good way of
answering
looking at it.
I'm not answering
that's
your
true.
question.
Yeah, and you've said that
properly.
before. When you go away, you're more energized when you return to the studio, and you're more grateful for it, because it is.
Yeah.
We all have day jobs and making money other ways and paying for that paint. So when you get in there, it's precious time, and you're probably much more productive when you go into the studio as well, because you're like, okay, now I'm here.
Well, you are. I remember I had a studio in Singer's Corner like 25 years ago. There's still artists there now. Patrick Ashton, I think, is still there. But I had a studio there, and I was in a difficult relationship at the time, and I was working in Apple, and on the construction line or the process line in Apple, and I was in this relationship that was going downhill rapidly. And when I went to the studio, I just painted and painted. And I was much more productive than the times when I had this whole day to myself. And this was a big question mark hanging over my head. How is it I'm doing better paintings now than when I had all the time in the world to strategize and plan?
Maybe
and
it's that constraint, or like the deadlines, or
absolutely.
Like sometimes I find that I might only have half an hour, but you could do something in half an hour. And sometimes when you've less time, maybe you're bolder, because you're like, okay, I've only got an hour, so you take that big risk. Whereas if you have the whole day, you could faff around and do lots of little things. And maybe sometimes you just go and make that bold move, and you can't overpaint when you have less time as well. You just have to leave it.
Right.
So sometimes that energy comes out, I think. I don't know. But it's all different strategies. What would you say? There's so many different parts of being an artist. What's your least favorite part, or your least favorite job that you have to do as an artist?
I mean, the least favorite
Talking
is the
to me
application.
on the podcast.
No, I get past that. I'm okay. But applications, Aideen, are a huge challenge, and they're part of the landscape, let's say, of being an artist. But at the same time, I tell the anecdote of having met an artist on the street, a friend of mine, and she asked me, "Did you do that recent Arts Council bursary application?" And I said to her, "I haven't applied to the Arts Council in 10 years. And guess what? I'm very happy." So that's not to disparage anybody who does apply, but I need to be very sure about applying for something now, because of the time that it takes, and not just the time, but the mental shift that's needed. I helped someone put together an application during lockdown, and there were 20 supporting documents needed for that.
Oh God.
And you're talking, in psychological terms, I believe that, there's all the best intentions in the world, but what the Arts Council and the government sometimes are creating is a mirror image of their jobs. They're creating people who are sitting down doing this, whereas that's the last thing that artists need to be doing. And it's the same for the kind of professional.
It's not just the Arts Council. I mean, it's if you want to get into an exhibition, like it was great for your exhibition that there was no form to be filled out, even a little online thing. But like maybe going forward, if you have lots of applications, you might have to introduce something to make it easier for you. But if you're going for, even gallery spaces in Ireland, they might say, write a proposal for an exhibition. I suppose they want to see something in writing. And maybe it levels the playing field as well, that everybody gets a chance to write something. I suppose it is a skill we should develop as artists, but it is, I agree with you. I hate that side as well. And I often don't, or I tend to procrastinate. I'm not like you. I should spend more time writing and thinking. I'm pretty much a last minute person for these applications.
We need to be careful as artists in one sense, because like, I don't have the correct cognitive therapy term for it, but there's something dangerous about writing and speaking about your work in a way that's not true, because your brain then accepts that is true. Your brain will accept, if you keep repeating to yourself, my work is about the post-structuralist investigation of such and such and such. This is art speak. And your brain doesn't know that that's not true, you know, and then you've got this shift and divide then between the applications Dermot and the real Dermot who's making work, you know. So, and
I always say, I think art speak, I don't know, like my background is I did literature. I had a master's in French literature before I moved eventually into being an artist. Art speak doesn't exist anywhere outside of the art world, maybe even the visual art world. It's just a very, like when I was taught to write English for my degree and my master's, it was always about saying something in less words. It makes it better. It's better English if you can say things in less words. And I think art speak and these applications and sometimes these statements are so obtuse and can be very flowery, and it can be lots of words layered upon words, and I don't know what it means. I was talking to a theatre director in Dublin actually, and he was asked to be on some board to evaluate proposals, and he was like going, what the hell is this? This is like, I don't understand it. It's not English. So it's great I think it's going to change. I think it's changed in some countries, but not yet in Ireland. You still see a lot of this, a lot of big words being put together.
There's some guys put a website together where you can get a fake proposal made of art jargon.
Yeah, there's the art statement generator, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but there's a great phrase
I suppose,
in
but at the
Italy.
same time, you have to kind of articulate your thinking. Like I remember the very early days, you asked me to be in this cafe space. And I remember I brought you these paintings and you sat down with me and you were like going, okay, Aideen, what are they about? And I was like, it was all so internal to me. Nobody had asked me, what are you painting? What's it about? And I couldn't even find the words to articulate. And you kept asking, I was like, it's about feelings. And you were like going, well, what feelings? And you kept asking me,
I'm so
and
sorry.
You were trying to get me to, not at all. It was actually very, but you were the first person who did that. And I had never written an artist statement or an artist bio. I didn't even know what they were. And I suppose, yes, there's that side. We have to articulate what our work is by talking about it. But then there's people who will never meet us. They'll never speak to us. And writing about art is a way of allowing people another way in. So it is a tool if it's used well. So it does have a place. But I agree with you about writing those applications are beyond painful. I'd say that is probably my least favorite jobs too.
It's a little bit cynical, right? But there was a thing that we used to joke about in college, you know. Can you imagine a situation where you were studying philosophy or literature in Trinity College in Dublin, and you submitted your proposal through painting, right? So that you were expected to explain your proposal through painting. So writing is ubiquitous. Writing is everywhere to explain everything, and people spend their days on the phone. It's everywhere. So we forget that we're using it. And for me, it's an art form in itself. If you look at someone like Christine Leach and the way she writes, she wrote a piece for an exhibition I curated in Macroom. This piece was called Threshold. And it's a review, if you like, of a thought piece on the show, but it's like a piece of literature. It's absolutely beautiful. So this is an art form unto itself. And you're asking people who are really good, let's say, in one aspect of art, visual art, and they spend their time learning that. You're asking them to transform that through another language, so that it's easier for you to look at, so that it's easier for you to understand.
Maybe that's why there is so much bad art writing, actually, because nobody's been trained how to write, and it is a skill. I agree with you, and it is
sure.
Like what I have one big document, and every time I write a statement or a bio, I'd say it's different because I'm constantly, and also what I'm painting is different, so the thought process is constantly changing. But I remember meeting artists and I say a presentation, and they would write out their statement of their bio, and I found it very intimidating. And I felt, well, I can't be a real artist because I don't have that. I don't speak it. But at the same time, I have to say, I think it's not all bad. I think you can have writing about art, like the writing you mentioned there by Christine Leach, which is insightful, and it gives another layer, another way into the painting. Like, I think titles are also important. Like you talked about the title of your exhibition, that tells a story. And titles of paintings they can be so powerful when they're right. Like a great title to a painting suddenly gives a whole other layer and a way in for the viewer without being prescriptive. It just gives another story. You know, when you write a post on Instagram, so writing has a place, and it is accessible, because I know a lot of people who I've met say they would never go into a gallery because they'd be intimidated. So there is a whole lot of people who don't maybe go and see art in person. So any way that art can engage people, and maybe writing is the most accessible because most people read. So they can see and then they can read. And actually an exhibition I saw recently of Corbin Walker's exhibition in the Crawford. And he had his own exhibition, and then he had a group show. And I have never seen such interesting labels beside paintings. He had the painting, and then he had written down why he chose it, his connection to that person. He had a little anecdote, and it was fascinating. So that for me I think they were the best labels of an exhibition I have ever seen. It added so many more layers. It added to my enjoyment hugely. So I suppose there's all different ways, and I think we can maybe break down all those rules, and if you could just kind of move past art speak. I mean, it's certainly out of vogue now in America, so I presume eventually it'll disappear here too.
It's fine. I can speak, I mean, I'm very interested in things like Tibetan Buddhism and how the non-dualistic version of reality maps over onto abstract expressionism. So I can talk and I can, explain complex ideas, but I really think there's the Italian phrase parle come mangi. So it's like, speak as you eat. It's a very short phrase, So do you go home and do you have meat and veg? Yeah, you probably do. And so speak as you eat. You don't go home and have haute cuisine, So why are you speaking in this way? That's
keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple, and then you're including people. You're not excluding people. And as you said, you have friends or family or whatever who are afraid to go into a gallery. I've come across this all my working life as an artist, of people who've got some version of this story of, well, I don't understand art, but it starts like this, or I don't really get why they do this. And when I worked in different spaces and galleries, I had great joy in breaking that down for people and saying, who told you? Who told you need to know about art? Who told you that this is an area of expertise that you need to beg to be allowed into? And I had one exhibition in 2012, a group exhibition in where the Lavit is now. It was run by the art college, so it was the Wansford Quay Gallery. And for the first couple of days, it was a group of maybe 16 artists that were ex-students, or some of them were ex-students from the Crawford. And I didn't leave a sheet at the door explaining what the exhibition was about, right?
Wow.
And I did it on purpose. I wanted people to come in and have a look and see the work for what it is, and use their own intelligence. And I got in trouble. I got in trouble with a little bit of trouble, let's say. There were questions asked as to why I didn't have a sheet. And then I did the sheet and I explained it. But Vera Ryan was still the art history professor. She's a huge figure in the Irish art scene. And she's retired from the college now, but she's written a number of books on the whole Irish art history. And she was the head of history at the time. And I said to her, Vera, let's have a discussion about this in front of the students, because the students were going to come in and look at the exhibition, and there was going to be a talk. And I said, let's not fix this, let's have this be a bone of contention between you and I, and we discuss it with the students. And we had one of the best discussions, because they didn't think that they were allowed to put their own interpretation onto the things, So it was one of the best talks I had ever in a gallery was with that.
I love that. Well, it's right. And you're kind of, you can now break the rules and set the rules in your own spaces as well. You could do it the way you want and try different things.
Hopefully.
I just want to ask you, do you ever procrastinate? You sound so busy and you're so productive, you do so many things. Do you ever procrastinate, or do you just always just do everything?
I don't believe it exists. I read an article somewhere recently that says laziness and procrastination, they don't exist. We're actually, I mean, if you think about it, you're always doing something. Procrastination is a
You do other
thing.
things.
It's a thing. You're doing
What do
something.
you
And
think? Can I ask you, for you, in your own opinion, what's the hardest part to being an artist?
what's the hardest part?
Or I don't know.
I think it's just being honest about the fact that this is a real thing. This is a real path. I think there's an awful lot of art out there that tries to justify itself by associating itself. Let's say art and science is a huge area. Art and health is another huge area. And there's lots of interesting people working in those areas. But on one level, there seems to be a need that art has to justify itself by associating itself with something else. So for me, it's believing that painting is a real path in itself. It's a thing unto itself, and try and stay the course. Maybe I'll be famous before I'm 90.
Definitely, Dermot, definitely. And how do you handle rejection?
It's difficult. It's not easy to be rejected about anything. But again, to the design thinking philosophy or approach, built into some of the 5 stages of design thinking is the prototyping stage. So you prototype an idea or a business or whatever, and you're always prototyping. Even this conversation with you is a prototype. So I'm getting feedback and I'm getting information back. So a rejection is just a prototype. It's just like, oh God,
I love that.
It's just a prototype. I got turned down from this gallery. Maybe I'm not the right person from that gallery. It's just, that's the way I look at it now. But I need a good reason to apply for something. So
you're much more discerning about what you apply for now. You apply for, yeah. Well, when you're organizing all your own stuff, you don't need to apply anymore.
I've had so many conversations with artists about why is this part of the art world wrong? Why is that part of the art world wrong? And often I've said, if we just stitch together all of those conversations, we can build our own thing. Do you know what I mean? And stop
you're
complaining
creating your own movement.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of your teachers, but what's the best advice do you think a mentor or teacher gave you that really stayed with you, that really helped you? If you can think of something.
Yeah, I mean, I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher, Henry Kono, who was a Japanese Canadian who came to Ireland and taught us Aikido for 12 or 15 years, even longer. He's dead now. But he was an absolute gent and a genius. And me reading all of my Zen books and my philosophy books, I was in a party with him once and I said to him, but we have to be in the present moment, Henry. I was saying to him, we how can we be in the present moment and just be here, And he said, nonsense. You need to have an objective. You need to have an objective in front of you out in the future. Otherwise, the energy won't come out. And I thought that was a brilliant understanding of the quality of energy in the body, because if you're only here in the present moment, the energy is here and it's nice and it's flowing. But if you want the energy to come out and go forward, you need an objective. Maybe you never get the objective, but at least you got this energy to come out.
You're striving. And that is brilliant advice. And do you set goals for yourself? Like, do you have those objectives for yourself?
Very soft goals, very, very soft, gentle. I'll have 2 coffees today. No, no.
But what objectives do you set yourself for that energy, apart from you don't have to share with us, but do you set an objective so your energy moves forward? No,
never. There's no objectives. There's ideas I need to buy in 2 weeks' time. Like, there's an application that I'm doing now at the moment, and it's for a particular grant that's there in the design space. But I know that even if I don't put that application in, it's worth going for that, because it'll force me to align the work that I'm doing. And you learn things as you get closer to a deadline. You learn things that you never would have learned before about why you're doing it, or what's important, or I won't do that part. So the deadlines and the kind of objectives are very, very abstract and soft.
So why not? Why not? If there was anybody listening now, Dermot, like an emerging artist who might be listening, or somebody who's even thinking about going into the art world, what advice would you give them?
It's similar to the 2 times I've been to the speed curating thing with the VAI. I was sitting there as a coach much more than a curator, and I was saying to any of the artists that I met, almost 90% of them were saying, how can I get into this gallery? How can I get more traction? And almost all of the answers I said to them was, do it yourself, do it yourself. Why don't you do it yourself? Why don't you do a partnership with, because everybody wants partnerships with the art world, but the art world is inundated with offers and requests, and can I have an exhibition in 3 years' time? And so if you associate yourself with other people who are not in the art world, offices, universities, charities, you're going to be pushing an open door. And there's 2 things. You might not get the traction that you want or the recognition from the art world, but you get movement. You get movement forward in your own space, and movement is half of the issue. It's the feeling of being stuck that is the death of your own creativity.
That's brilliant advice, and that's very similar to the advice you got about that energy moving forward. So you're saying people create their own opportunities or look in areas where nobody else is looking. Maybe showing space in other spaces or connecting with people.
There's a lot of libraries. For example, there's a lot of libraries have been redeveloped, and a lot of them have gallery spaces that are just as nice and good as any white cube gallery around the country.
They are. Yeah, actually, one of I think my first exhibition was a joint exhibition in the library in Bishopstown, which is a gorgeous little space. Actually,
I heard it's lovely.
It was really, really nice, and it was just a really
library.
Nice,
libraries are municipal spaces where there's people in there all day long, right?
Yes.
And you have your audience straight away, whereas you go to a gallery and they're crying to get people in. They can't get them in.
Absolutely, I love that. Are there any books you'd recommend that you find really useful, art books or otherwise? A few books that you really think?
There's lots of books. I mean, there's a stack of books over here that I haven't read that I promised myself to read. But in terms of, 1 second now, in terms of the art space,
2 or 3 books that you've read that you think everybody should read.
There's this one, Working Space by Frank Stella. So Frank Stella is a painter, an artist, multidisciplinary artist from the States. And he wrote this series of lectures called Working Space, and he associates modern abstract painting with Renaissance painting and how they developed and how they're similar. It's really, really great. From an artist perspective, that's a really great book, you can probably find that online, a version of it online. Is
that about creating your own working space? Is that it? About the
working space he's talking about is not your studio. It's the working space of painting, of like the space within paint. So how do you make that
the composition?
Yeah, not just composition, but how does the language, like if you imagine Renaissance painting peeled away and the structure that's behind that, you essentially have abstract painting straight away. So he did a great amount of research and showed that like there isn't this fracture at the beginning of the 20th century and then you've got modern art, and it's just not like that. There's lots of tears and pulls and sort of stretches, but there's no break. So here was the classical period, here was the modern period. There's no such thing, So people should be able to pick and choose from different eras.
I love that. Any other recommendation?
Yeah, my girlfriend got me into Murakami, Haruki Murakami. That's the Wind Up Bird Chronicle. So, the art book I just described is great from a sort of a nerdy artist perspective, but I get kind of like the music we spoke about at the start. I get much more inspiration from a piece of fiction. So Murakami, they joke about him being up for the Nobel Prize for Literature every year and he never gets it, and the Japanese are very disappointed, but it doesn't matter. He's probably not suitable because he's writing in such an unusual way about human nature, So it's important.
These are great books. I'm definitely going to have to read these. And the covers,
Thank you.
people can't see the covers, they're listening, but they're amazing. And I'm going to put links to all these books and everything that Dermot has said in the show notes, people who want to dive in. Have you got something else for us? I'm intrigued. Any other book?
In terms of books, I mean, there's like I mentioned Tibetan Buddhism before, and like that's called True Perception. That's Chogyam Trungpa. That's an unusual name, but he was a Tibetan master who ended up in Colorado in the 1960s and started a foundation there, which is now a college. I think they have an arts department as well. So, you know, it's a very particular, you know, it's as language based as, let's say, we were talking about the fine art world, but I think they have a very great insight into original creativity and your basic ground that you're dealing with. So your basic ground as a human is your awareness. So, you know, you could say Aideen is a painter and she uses materials. Yeah, but she's manipulating the awareness of people. So it's awareness that you're manipulating. You're just using the paint to do that, you know. So he was very interested in creativity. So this is all his lectures about creativity. You can get that online. They've just put a digital archive of all of his lectures online. So there's a lot of resources there for that. But I think he's wonderful.
They're great books. And it's so eclectic. Like, they really say so much about you and all your interests. They're so diverse. I love it. And I want to ask you as well, if you could meet any artist or a couple of artists, living or dead, who would you choose? And is there anything you'd ask them, or what would you say to them if you got to meet them?
Well, I always, when I'm in Barcelona with Sarah, I always go, no matter what, even if the exhibition hasn't changed, I'll go to the Tapies Foundation. Antonio Tapies was a Catalan artist. And, you know, I would have seen his work in college, and I didn't think much of it. It was very arte povera, you know, arte povera. It's like very raw, rough materials, like the nails I was speaking about in the studio, you know, things that are banged together. But like, I've just fallen in love with him in the last few years, and there's a huge library there of his books and his influences. And he was very interested in mixing kind of spiritual traditions from the East and West. And he was against war, and he was passionate about, you know, rights and justice. And, you know, that's one artist I would love to have sat down with him and met him. But the other one I would like to say is the American painter Joan Mitchell is so strong. Like, there's an exhibition I'd like to see in Paris.
I know.
Joan Mitchell,
it's ending this month.
This month, you know, so there's Mitchell and Monet. So, you know, I don't know if there was a direct influence, but they're definitely well suited together. And
she lived in Paris. She lived in Paris. She actually had an affair with Sam Beckett. Actually, I discovered recently. Really? I read her biography. Yeah, I actually, would you believe it, last night I was actually looking at direct flights from Cork to Paris, thinking, could I go over and back in the day? But there are none right now. But anybody at the time of recording, it's on for another few weeks. I would so love to see that in person, to see their...
I'd love to meet her, and I'd love to find out. I'd love to find out what it was like for her painting when there were so many strong male painters at the time. And like, it's
what would
very
you ask
strange.
Her? If you could meet her, what would you ask her?
I'd ask her about her bravery, right? Because the paintings are so loose. They're so painterly and so loose, as they're almost falling apart in front of you. Like, they're well-made canvases, but the paint is so loose. Like, de Kooning and people like that were very famous for, you know, messy, juicy, wet painting. But she went even a stage further. And now, in retrospect, you know, they're probably some of the best paintings that were made during the period. I mean, that's my perspective. You know, there's other artists I know who would have very different opinions on that. But every time I see her work, I think there's something great in it, you know.
And I agree with you that there's an exhibition. It's on the Louis Vuitton space in Paris. Monet and Mitchell together. So, oh my God, that would be... Apparently, I've just seen it on Instagram. I've seen photographs, but that is one I would love to be in the room and see that. I spent a year in Paris when I was 19. I spent most of my time going to art exhibitions, and that's the thing when you're in a country or a city where you can go and see the stuff accessibly. There's nothing like it. That seeing that rawness of being like breathing in the same space as these paintings you might have only have seen in a book, or on a screen. It is, there's an energy there in the room when you're in the room with the painting.
Absolutely.
It's speaking to
I
you,
was
and
in,
you're speaking. I think it's something about, for me as well, about seeing the hand of the artist. You can almost, you feel like you're so connected to the artist, particularly if you're a fan of that artist, or you're nerding out, but that you feel like you're touching them almost, they're touching you. There's just I get very emotional
totally.
when I'm in the presence of paintings that I
Absolutely.
love.
Mm.
Definitely.
I was in,
So
I went,
sorry,
I
go
went to
ahead.
Paris when I was in college in Dunleary for 1 year, and we went to Paris. And I remember going to the Musée d'Orsay, and I was tired, and I probably wasn't eating right. And you get to the top floor, and that's another brilliant painting, another fantastic, famous one. I can't enjoy it. I'm just tired, and I want to go home. And then I came across this Lobus Corinth. Lobus Corinth was a German painter, and very expressive, kind of painterly thing. But it was a portrait of some writer, but it looked just like James Joyce. I just walked around this corner. There's this portrait of a guy with little round glasses, and I just got so emotional over this one small painting. And
Yeah, the
that's what
reaction is so visceral, isn't it? It can be so, I suppose that it is, and that's why we're painting, and we love paintings. You're connected. There's a connection there that, I don't know, I certainly feel it. When I was living there, I was lucky enough that I had my boyfriend at the time was studying art, and he was able to give me this free pass, so I could just go into every single, because in France you pay. It's not like in Ireland where all these galleries are free. You pay every time. So I just go in all the time. Like I was actually studying at the Sorbonne. I was doing very little studying. I was going to look at art all the time. And I just, my God, I just like wander in. And when you have that time, I mean, that's when you're young, you have all that time. I just go in, and you can spend hours just in one room, and then go back another day. If I had all those, I had endless time as a student.
Sounds great.
But so Dermot, for anybody, obviously I'm going to put links in the show notes, and I put some images of Dermot's work, and he's got his incredible exhibition, which I'm really looking forward to seeing now, and seeing how you hang all those big pieces after you talked about it in plain visual. How can people find you, or how can they find out more of your spaces?
I mean, the easiest way is to go to my website, and I try as much as I can to put extra links on the website to go off to other things.
What's your website? Can you say it for people?
dermotbrowne.squarespace.com.
Okay, so dermotbrowne.squarespace.com, and I'll put a link as well. How about an Instagram? Are you on Instagram?
Yeah, it's Dermot Browne Artist with underscores between the words. So that's the easiest way, and unfortunately I'm on it way too much. And you can find me there and chat to me. I try and write back to people, and things are getting busy.
We know you're on LinkedIn. We know you're on LinkedIn. You mentioned LinkedIn already.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. But not a lot of artists are on there all the time. So but reach out to me.
If somebody was interested in finding out more about these spaces, or can artists contact you about exhibiting in these spaces, or is that, are you going to have some sort of way or mechanism for that?
No, I haven't planned anything. They can contact me by any means. Contact me, and at the moment I'm trying to do things a little bit thematically. I have ideas for this year, but as I said, I don't want to tie things down until I know that it fits the space. So it's human nature, Aideen. For example, like I put on the exhibition with the female artists, and I have loads of female artists now asking me, can they have an exhibition? And
really?
But that's normal. So people think, oh, he must show only female artists, and it's just not like that. And
what are they doing? Are they DMing you? Is it? And
yeah, a mixture of things, and that's okay. It's on Instagram, or it's on the my email is on the website. So I'm happy to hear from people, and I try and write back. But it's like I say to the artists in the networking meetings that we go to. I said, look, try your best to do it for yourself. And it's a human nature thing that we think. Yeah, we think that somebody else out there is going to save us and help us and bring us into the fold. But the art world is full of silos of people, doing their own thing. So why not you set up your own world?
Okay, that's great. So I just think you're doing so much. I'm so impressed, Dermot, with everything you're doing. And I'm just so excited now to see your exhibition after hearing more about your process.
And I love your
that is
energy,
opening
Aideen.
in March, isn't it?
I love your energy, Aideen. I love the way you're doing things. And this podcast is another great entrepreneurial example of doing it yourself. You know, it's fair
But
play
this is
to you.
something I procrastinated about. I had this idea for this podcast about, oh God, about 2 years ago, I think. And I just kept putting it off because I don't have a lot of time and I'm scared of technology. Like the first few times, this kind of headphone and mic, the first time I tried, it's over Christmas, I said I had a little bit of time. I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to start. And what I've done with everything is I just dive into it. I don't think about it too much. I just figure out that I will learn as I go. So I'm sure the first few episodes were kind of ropey and I'm getting better at even like figuring out how to interview people, how it all works.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge learning curve for me. But the reason why I'm doing it is, I suppose when I started my whole journey on Instagram, and I felt like very much like I'm not a real artist. And I knew very few people even on Instagram. All the artists I met initially were mostly on Instagram. And particularly during lockdown, I just started sharing more about my thought process or what was going on, or even all the things about imposter syndrome. And I would get a lot of responses from people who like would send me private messages saying, I'm like you, or I identify with this. So I realized there's a whole lot of people out there who are like me. And you actually said this to me, there's a lot of people with the same journey of moving from a non-creative world into a creative world. But when you're there, you feel like you're the only one. You feel like, and I felt also that I was very old starting as an artist. I felt like I felt very self-conscious about that and full of fear, I suppose. So I had this idea, and I suppose that's why the title came about, because for me to be an artist, you have to kind of very brave, and you are a warrior, because it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to express yourself. So I had the idea, I had the title, and then I decided I'm just going to do it. So I recorded a few episodes and then I didn't tell anybody.
Good idea. Prototyping.
I just put them out there, and then I was in January, I just said, okay, it's here, I've done it, and people started listening. And again, unsurprisingly, people wrote lovely messages saying, this resonates with me. This is my story. I identify with it. So that gives me the knowing that I'm on the right path and I'm sharing something that's of value. So I suppose I'm doing it. It's like an act of service. I want to give back, because I've contacted people, or anytime anybody shares something with you, you learn. And I suppose I'm still learning. I'm learning by talking to people like you and other people I've interviewed. But I also feel that I've learned a lot, and if I can share that and I can help anybody, then that's great. Because when I started off, I listened to a lot of podcasts about every aspect of the art world. I don't feel there's enough Irish voices out there. A lot of them are very or American, and the Irish art world is different. And I'm also fascinated with people's stories. I always want to know how they got there. I just don't want to see the painting on the wall and the exhibition. I want to know, what's their studio like? How do they paint? What paints do they use? I want to know all of that background stuff. So I'm asking questions that I'm curious about. A bit like the way you say you pull together exhibitions of people you want to see. So it's a way for me to be nosy and find out all this information and share it with other people.
Well done. I hope it helps as many people as I suspect it will, you know.
Oh, we'll see. It's all, who knows what comes with these things. But I think every time, it's a bit like you talk about that energy. When you put something out there, things come and things happen that we don't even know about, but because we're being brave and we're doing something new. And by not painting, I was thinking of what you were saying about, I'm in my studio as I record this, but I'm not painting. But I can see paintings on the screen and I'm going, I know what I'm going to do now. So it's given me that restriction on my painting time. It's going to give me energy when I go back to paint. And also it's so inspiring to hear the stuff that you're doing. So Dermot, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I wish you every success in all the amazing things you're doing and next steps in your creative journey, in your own art and your upcoming solo exhibition, and in all this amazing stuff you're doing in these new exciting art spaces. There'll be links.
Thank you so much.
On the show notes for anyone who wants to see more. If you want to dive in a bit deeper, and I'll also have some examples of Dermot's work, and I'll tag and share on Instagram also. So thank you very much for listening to The Warrior Artist. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you have a few moments, I'd be very grateful if you could rate or review, as this helps others find me. If you want to see more of what I'm up to or get in touch with a suggestion for an episode, you can find me on Instagram at Aideen_Glynn. That's EADAOIN_GLYNN, and through my website, aideenglynn.com. Thank you for listening. Wishing you all the best with your creative journey. And remember, you are a warrior artist.